The books that I saw fell, as you might expect, into two camps. There's an expression of the world as we wish the world was, with magic at ready access, and there's an expression of what we fear the world might become. Jerrod Bacon is a writer of speculative fiction who writes in this darker vein, in the latter style. He said in his bio that he finds refuge in the science fiction and fantasy genres, although having briefly visited this alternate universe that he creates, I'm not sure I would turn there for refuge exactly, because he's scared scared me to death, which I think was his intention. He's a committed writer who's been writing for 15 years, and he was part of the fiction workshop here at the library. He's written for and reviewed video games, and his fertile imagination is currently at work on projects in various media, including novels, comics, and video. I was struck by his sympathy for his characters and the complexity and wholeness of the world that he imagines. Please welcome Jerrod Bacon.
So I don't know if you guys can, should we get there? So it's not as dark as she tries to make it out. Not as scary, hopefully. It's kind of a world about, like, I typically write more about realistic fantasy. So it's a real world model, modern set time, but it's got something that's different, something that makes it fantasy-esque. So this is kind of the first chapter of my novel here called Novus Cerebrum. So several times during the night, she was woken by their screams. She knew that she had woken them up with her own fears and nightmares before. Soon she would again. The screams moved from person to person, so the so-called medication given to them was the experiment itself, and whatever the chemical was, the side effect was the nightmares. They gave the drug to them in a circuit, 3 sets of screams before she would scream herself. Most people have 7-day weeks, but the experiments here learned to work with 4. The faint sound of keys woke her. It must be morning. The keys jingled and then found their position in the door. There was a slight hum of life and the sound of the pressurized mechanism before the door pulled into the ceiling. A frightened chirrup came from the baton carried by the guard. She was on her feet immediately, head down and hands balled into one another in front of her. Sorry. The guard wasn't even halfway in the cell. That's right, K-12. You know your role, don't you? The guard was as cocky and his voice was like an annoying fly in silence. It was the same thing every day. K-12 shuffled down at the hall and, as if bound by a pair of invisible manacles, she was pushed into a larger cell with twice the confinement, but just as many amenities as the last. None. The only comforts were the lights embedded into the ceiling, but even they had held a tinted color in their hinges. She knew what this room was. It was a shared exercise room. The door clicked into a place behind her. K-12's eyes shot across the room to another door that suddenly shifted up under the same pressurized mechanism. Her male companion over the past few weeks here was pushed into the cell. He was taller than her, but like her was underweight. The lack of sunlight was taxing, but he was somehow paler than she was. K-12 could tell his hair had once been a dark brown, probably like a rich chocolate, but now it was faded and dull. Her blonde hair herself was losing its true color too. The door shifted closed behind him, and 2 of them stood in silence. A few moments passed before the man decided to move away from the door. K-12 was being studied despite his avoiding gaze. Her skin tingled from only his presence. The majority of the visits here, he sat in just a corner. She too took her place along the opposite side without a door. So how are you holding up? His mouth didn't move. Instead, his voice was pressed through her skull and lightly directed through her mind. It was part of the experiments. They didn't ask what they had signed up for, and in truth, they were never volunteered either. I'm fine, but I don't understand. I don't know how much more of the migraines I can take. Do we even know what they want with us? K-12 was the newest experiment. She'd managed to figure out that much from their designations. It was easy to assume that the letter was first initial, but nobody could remember their names anymore. And K-12 was her experiment number, or 12 was her experiment number. The man across the room was given the designation of L6. No, I don't push anymore. I think they expect me to, so I don't. Have you found your voice yet? It was subtle, but K-12 knew what he was talking about. She could speak normally like the others could, but L6 was referring to the actual tests being done here. No, I don't, but you know, so why don't you just tell me? Give me something, anything, please. She let more sorrow through her message than she meant, but she really did feel that she was wearing thin. Do you know your elements? His presence within her mind was soothing. There was something about it that she couldn't place, but it gave the gray days at least one new color. You mean the nitrogen, helium, a little, maybe? No, like your archaic earth elements. You mean like earth, fire, wind, and water? She paused. What about them? They're trying to create conduits for the elements. They're trying to get us to manipulate these forces in nature to build the mass-produced serum. Her throat vibrated. It was funny. She had almost forgotten what laughter felt like. You should be locked up. As if on cue, L6 raised one of his hands out towards her, the palm up. She stared intently at the center of it. K-12 could feel something within the room shift. Didn't know what it was, but something was in the air, and it seemed to pull towards L6. In mere seconds, a liquid ball floating like a balloon minus the plastic, inches above L6's palm. Maybe I should be. The familiar pressurized mechanism shifted and the door closest to L6 opened. 2 guards came out, both wielding the taser batons. L6 clenched his fist through the ball of liquid like a bubble, and it popped out onto the floor. He was escorted out of the room. K-12 stood. There was never left alone here. By the time she stood, the door had opened and she had walked out to the conjoining room. She moved in silence through the brightly lit, empty hallways. She stared at her feet, wondering about what she had just seen. What just happened? She slowed and sensed the guard's presence behind her with the chirrup of his taser baton. She pressed her voice into the guard's mind. What is the purpose of this facility? Tell me. She pushed the fear and the experimental status through her words, and she could feel the fear within the man swell. It's true, he said. They're trying to harness the power of the nature's wrath. The scientists are close. His natural voice was hollowed from emotion, his personality held hostage. What did L6 just do? What was I given? She was desperate but commanding. The bright white lights turned red and flashed, and it all made sense why L6 had stopped producing facts from the minds of the guards. The walls hissed and she could see them shift slightly. Compartments opened along the walls and exposed a huge rifle array sewn together with clean metallic feel of the rest of the facility. The 4 barrels pointed down at her. Farther along the wall above the door in her cell, a smaller gun pointed as well. Her mind let go of the guard before her. He could answer. She was caught in her own fear now. The barrels shifted robotically and clicked to a stop. The smaller rifle popped as a tuft of smoke erupted from the barrel. She braced for the impact of a bullet, but felt the prick of a needle penetrate the joint of her shoulder. Like a severe allergy to bee stings, K-12 felt the ripple of venom rush through her body before going limp, the numbness swallowing her whole. And that's where it ends.
I don't know, I'm still scared. It's those chemically induced migraines.